had the situation where the previous pooling guidance was put out for sort of limited consultation. There were things in it that landed, can I say, better than others.
Yeah.
And then there was a commitment from MHCLG to go back, have another look at it, and come out with a further consultation, but this time make it a full consultation process. And a couple of quite significant things have happened since then. I mean, the first one being what we were just talking about, COVID. So COVID sort of reassess our priorities for a year, and it made us all go into business as usual. It was all about keeping the lights on, making sure the pensioners got paid, doing what was necessary. Certainly those first few months, sort of April, May, June of last year, when everyone was struggling around for what is it that we have to do. We're all now working from home and things don't quite work the same way, and we all weren't quite used to Teamsing and Zoomsings as we are now, both in terms of communicating with each other, but also holding meetings and all of that kind of stuff. So sort of everything was more about figuring out how we get through COVID and keep everything going. Plus, obviously at the same time, at that time, early last year, the market panned. I mean, it just decided it was going to go through the floor. So for all of those reasons, it was very understandable why pooling and certainly transitioning assets dropped down the priority list. There were big decisions that need to be made. We weren't in the right situation in terms of being able to hold meetings, in terms of being confident about having discussions within those meetings about making decisions around transitions. And also, just it wasn't a good time to do transition, because you don't transition at the bottom of the market because you're potentially locking in your losses. So for lots of good reasons, that wasn't happening, and it wasn't the top of people's priority list. And then in terms of the actual guidance itself, that was not derailed, but was put back and had to be rethought because of that Supreme Court decision on the Palestinian case. And that was less to do with the actual judgment itself with regard to what the guidance was trying to tell us not to do. So we had that bit of guidance that came out and said, you can't make divestment decisions, you can't sanction, you can't decide, make investment decisions around things that were not in line with UK foreign or defence policy. That was put into guidance. That was then challenged. That challenge went all the way to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court found against the government. And it was the reason that Supreme Court found against the government that was the important thing, because that reason then had reverberations beyond that one question. And the reason that they found against the government is that the Supreme Court decided and was very clear about guidance should be about how, not what. So the guidance for LGPS funds that's issued by government, whether it's statutory or not, should be around how people in LGPS, pension committees, investment committees, how they go about making their decisions, not restricting those decisions, not determining what the outcome of those decisions should be. So to boil it down, it was guidance should be about how, if government wants to introduce must, the must should be in regulation. Now, from the very beginning, pooling has been a tenuous link back to legislation. There's always been that question, is it mandatory? And if so, on what basis is it mandatory? And as the argument that was made which had legs at the time, which was the Regulation 7 of the 2016 regulations says that you must have a strategy, and that strategy must be in accordance with guidance, and part of your strategy must be your approach to pooling. The regulation says your strategy must say what your approach to pooling is, but your strategy must be in accordance with guidance. And it was the guidance that then set out government's thoughts on what pooling was, how much should be transitioned over, who should be appointing asset managers, etc., etc. Supreme Court decision threw a spanner in the middle of that and effectively said you shouldn't have musts in your guidance. If government you have red lines about things like pooling, you have things that when you are talking to local government, you're saying this is something you must do or mustn't do. According to that Supreme Court judgment, that should be in regulation. So, for example, the guidance talks about substantial amounts of assets going through the pools, majority or whatever it was. A straight translation from the Supreme Court judgment was that no, if there is going to be from government a direction as to how much of your assets should go through your pool, that really should be in guidance. Really should be in regs. It should be a regulator, rather than it saying your strategy should include your approach to pooling. It should say something like your strategy should include how you are going to put X amount of your assets through your pool. Another example, guidance talked about asset managers being appointed by the pools, whatever those structures were, but not by the council, not by the pensions committee. The regulations, as they stand at the moment, give a power to administering authorities to appoint managers. There is no restriction on that. It's just a general power to appoint managers. It doesn't say appoint managers apart from in relation to the assets going through your pools. That was in the guidance. So effectively, MHC will have to go away, look at the guidance again and go, okay, well, we got all the bits from the previous stuff where when we did the initial conversation, there were people coming back and going, don't like that bit, don't like that bit, don't like that bit, so we need to rethink it. Things like the greater good clause that everyone got very excited about, that you need to think about the LGPS as a whole when you're making your decisions, and how does that fit with fiduciary duty. So that was something they were going to have to rethink about anyway. Things in that proposed guidance saying your pool structures must be FCA regulated. I always warn them against that one, because that's for the FCA to determine, not for MHCLG. Because it's for FCA to say if you have a collective investment scheme, that must be regulated. Because it goes back to why the LGPS is not currently FCA regulated. Why the City of Westminster doesn't have to be FCA regulated to make investment decisions. And it doesn't have to be regulated because it is investing its own money. So that goes back to the status of the pension fund. The pension fund is not a pension fund in the sense that it is in the private sector, where it is a fund held under trust law. So the trustees are investing somebody else's money. Therefore, the methods they use have to be FCA regulated because you're investing somebody else's money. City of Westminster is investing its own money because the pension fund is a revenue reserve. And that revenue reserve, although it's heavily ring-fenced because of the regulations, you can only use it for certain things, you can only pay certain things into it. of Westminster, in the same way as the housing reserve or any other reserve that is held by the City of Westminster. It's legally its money. Now, as soon as you start joining with other people, and together you are investing money, you're not making decisions solely about your own money. And as soon as you take the step over that line, you have to be FCA regulated, because that's a collective investment scheme.
That wouldn't apply to a shared service, though, would it? Like with the tri-borough arrangement?
No, because you still have 3 individual committees who are still making their own decisions.
Oh, okay, right, gotcha. Yeah.
They're still investing their own money.
Yeah.
So that's more similar to City of Westminster decides to invest with BlackRock. BlackRock needs to be FCA regulated because it's investing the money of multiple clients. But City of Westminster doesn't have to be FCA regulated to make that decision.
Yeah.
But as soon as you get into a situation, and probably the easiest way to understand this, forget the external managers. Let's take West Yorkshire. So West Yorkshire has its own in-house investment team. That investment team is effectively acting as an asset manager because it's investing money directly. But it doesn't have to be FCA regulated because it's still investing its own money.
Yeah.
As soon as it starts investing money for, say, Merseyside, if Merseyside wanted to invest via the in-house team of West Yorkshire, then the West Yorkshire investment team will need to be FCA regulated because they're no longer investing their own money. Best way to think about that would be Lothian. So there is no pooling in Scotland, but Lothian act on behalf of 2 other funds in Scotland, Falkirk and
yeah.
Fife, I think it is.
Yeah.
And the in-house investment team in Lothian invests the money of Fife and Falkirk. That structure in Lothian is FCA regulated because it's investing somebody else's money.
Right.
So MHCLG, and I understand why they did it, because they were trying to point pooling in one way or another, said your structures must be FCA regulated. For me, that was a step too far, because that is, again, it's not for MHCLG to actually say that. It's for FCA to look at the structures that we're using and go, that needs to be FCA regulated, otherwise you're breaking the law. It's not an MHCLG call, it's an FCA call.
Yeah.
So those things that we're going to have to look at anyway. Now, because of the Supreme Court decision, there's all of the other musts that run all the way through both the original guidance and the proposed new guidance. They basically had to look at every must and go, is this actually a must? Because if it is, and we are absolutely determined to direct local authorities to do it in this way, that probably needs to go into regs. It always used to be that you could say regulations give power to statutory guidance, and in effect that statutory guidance has the same status as the original regulation. Supreme Court was saying, actually no, it doesn't.
So have they gone through their list and worked out what the musts are?
They're in the process, so they have to do 2 things. They have to go through, is this a must? And so that's job 1. That's almost the easy job. The second one, which is the one that I would imagine that they would be struggling with for all kinds of reasons, is if it's a must and we want it to be a must, it's going to have to go into regs. This is probably the worst time ever to be going to ministers and going, we need to make some tweaks to the LGPS regulations for this purpose. Everybody across government in every department at the moment knows that if they go to ministers with a request for legislation that isn't about COVID or Brexit, they're probably going to get a no. So, because one, we've got to spend parliamentary time doing it when there's a great big long list of other things. So unless it's in government's absolute top priority list, you're going to struggle to get legislative time for it. Good example of that being McLeod. They're having to find time for McLeod because a court has bloody well told them to.
Yeah.
So they don't really want to, but they're going to have to. This is a do you want to? How important is it compared to everything else? And then secondly, even if you didn't have that question, there's the question that says, if you do stick it in regs, you're going to have to consult on those regs and then wait for the potential backlash.
Yeah.
Because there's a massive difference in guidance going, we'd really like you to do this, to regulations saying, you've got to do this. And is there a potential for certain funds around the country to go, no, I'm going to JR that because I think you are going beyond your powers. So there was, whether government is right or not, there was a potential battle in there. Whether that battle would end up in the courts or not, there was a potential battle in there from, we know that there are some funds out there, you've got one of them, who just would love to turn around and tell government to sod off. They're just not going to do it. So you've got a potential court battle, but you've also got, to get it through, you would have to use political capital. Because you're taking on elected members, and probably in the vast majority of cases, as you'll know in London, elected members from your own party. Because it's going to be the Kensingtons and the Bromleys and whatever in London who are going to raise a stink about it. So they're elected members from you. Do you really want to spend political capital on this as opposed to everything else that you've got? Because you've only got a limited amount of political capital, and after yesterday, even less than you had before.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, what are the backbenchers really excited about? What is going to cause you a problem if it goes through Parliament? What's going to go in the post bag? What's going to cause your potentially your local councillors who you rely on as your foot soldiers when it comes to things like general elections and by-elections, to go out and knock on doors and get people to vote for you? Do you want to piss them off? So that will be the process that's going on at the moment.
So that list of musts is, I suppose that's being kicked around as we speak. Yeah.
Yeah, the list of musts will be being kicked around as, is this really a must? And then if it is really a must, do we actually want to go down the regulation route? And given where we are at the moment, so with COVID, with Brexit, with everything else that government needs parliamentary time for and needs political capital for, I would be very, very, very surprised if this is high up on the agenda for making regulations about it.
How long do you see it being delayed? A couple of years? Even longer?
No, I think we will get guidance. I think we will get a consultation, if not by the end of this calendar year, early next year. If we do, I would imagine it's because the decision has been made, we're not going to do legislation.
Sorry, say that one again.
If we get a consultation this year on guidance, I think it will be because ministers have said, no, we're not doing legislation.
Right.
So I think the guidance, when it comes, those musts will have had to have been softened.
And if they do decide that legislation is possible?
Well, there are a couple of things. They could look at, we're going to have to do legislation anyway for McLeod. We're probably going to have to do legislation anyway for Exit Cap when that comes back. So there will be slots.
So they could tag it on those.
tag it on.
Yeah.
Now, that comes back to the political capital thing, because yes, we can find parliamentary time, but do we just want to get these regulations through the House without a row, because it's just about the cloud, or it's just about exit cap? If we tag on something like this, is that going to delay those regulations getting through the House and the primary purpose that we want them to get through for?
Right. So there's some fine judgments required.
Very fine judgments. You and I both know that for pooling to get to the place where it needs to be, so we go back to what is pooling about? Forget what was said in the original consultation. Pooling is about a number of fundamental things. One, it's the alternative to what else was set out in the first place. It's an alternative to merger. Now, you could say that, okay, fine, if they're not willing to do legislation about pooling, they won't be willing to do legislation about merger. That's a call that we could all make. So it's about that. But it's also fundamentally about, and I had a chat with an asset manager about this the other day, on the cost saving side, which is not everything, but it's what people tend to focus on. Cost savings come with scale, right? They don't come before scale, they come with scale. And they rely on scale. So for example, some of the fees that are being quoted by asset managers to pools have at least half an eye on the eventual scale of that pool.
Yep.
If there is any doubt starting to creep in that scale will not be achieved, then asset managers' willingness to debate fees will become less. The worst thing that can happen with pooling is that we end up with, I don't know, out of the 300 billion in the LGPS, we end up with, I don't know, 100 billion pooled. Is that going to give us enough scale? Because we're still talking about 100 billion across 8 pools there. Is that going to give those pools enough scale to actually convince asset managers that this is a long-term thing that is going to produce the scale that they're looking for in those fees? Or is it just going to result in a situation where we've basically got another 8 asset managers out there?
Yeah.
And worst case scenario, we end up with the naysayers' prophecies about just adding an extra layer of cost between us and the asset managers being true. So governments also, and this is one of the things that we've been talking to governments about, have to, as well as all of those considerations I've just talked about, have to think about this might need a nudge from government, and possibly even a bit more than a nudge, given the fact that it's sort of drifted over the last 12, 18 months. Yes, there have been transitions going across, but they were people who were always going to do it. The ones who have been sitting on the sidelines going, I'm basically going to wait and see if this works or not before I actually start transitioning, are still sitting there. And until the pools are able to go to those people and give them an offer they can't refuse, or until they are made to, that will probably continue to be the case. And the offer they can't refuse will be as a result of one of time, while the pools develop the range of products that everybody needs, but also, as I said, the scale that will give them the fees that will make it obvious that if you want a particular asset class, your pool is going to be the cheapest place to go get it. So that's all in the mix in terms of the original pooling project.
So it's a kind of a tipping point that you get this inclusion from everybody, that it really becomes the only game in town where you're going to get good investment returns and cheap fees.
So if for example, let's say pooling was done on a comply or explain basis.
Yeah.
It's sort of not even that at the moment, because it's not like you have to sit there and go, right, in my annual report I have to say I've got this much through the pool, I've got this much not through the pool, and here's all my reasons why this is not going through the pool. Right? The better the offer from the pool, the more obvious it becomes that you're just keeping it out the pool for political reasons or because you don't like pooling than for any good logical reason.
Yep.
So if the pool's offering everything you want and offering you that on a very competitive basis, why on earth aren't you doing it?
Yeah.
Pools need to be able to get to that point. Now, as I said, that's a combination of them getting all the funds they need, but it's also people actually throwing the money in their direction. So, for example, London Civ, if it's looking for a particular fund, to develop a particular fund, it's got to go out to London boroughs and say, who's actually willing to put some money into this? Because 3 of you have asked for it, but if I only get the 3 of you, is that going to get the scale needed to actually be of any benefit to those 3 who've asked for it? Because the 3 of them could have got together, gone to one manager and negotiated a fee.
Yeah.
Without my costs as a pool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a fine balance on that one. So that's not really a tipping point. It's drifting at the moment. Is it going to pick up again to get to the next level where it really needs to get to? I think the other thing is as well that because we haven't seen the guidance and we haven't had direction from government, the other thing that's probably drifted is this whole question of who makes what decision about what. The clarification around what is strategy and what is implementation has been left to everyone to fight about. Now, that might be the right thing to do, but it doesn't help a pool get to where it needs to get to. Unless everyone's in agreement as to what that should be. So you look at somebody like Borders to Coast, and for whatever reason, they've managed to get a consensus that has largely avoided that fight over what's strategy, what's implementation. But in some of the other pools, a lot of the other pools, there is still this, as I said before, if I want Japanese banking equities, is that a strategic decision or is it an implementation decision? As a pensions committee, should my choice be between equities and bonds, or active equities and passive equities, or even active equities in a certain geographical sector like US or emerging, or which of those are my choice and which of those are the choice of the pool?
So it's the finer points of the asset allocation. Yeah.
So what is asset allocation? What is implementation? Where this now comes full circle and is going to have another point of potential conflict, or alternatively a point where the pools can really prove themselves, will be in climate change. Because when the regulations come out about doing TCFD reporting, those requirements will be on each fund. Right? So City of Westminster is going to have to set measures, it's going to have to set targets, it's going to have to do scenario analysis, and it's going to have to report against all of that. Potentially as an individual fund, that's a big ask because there's a lot of resource implication there. And there's also a lot of potential. If you were on your own with loads of managers, it's you having to deal with all those managers to get all the information that you need in the way that you need it in order to meet your measures, your targets, and your scenario planning. The pool, if it's got scale, can potentially do a much quicker and better job of that. But that only works if everybody's measures and targets are all the same. So 33 in London, if they all come out with different measures and different targets and different scenarios that they want to plan against, how does the pool do that? So I hate to use the word battleground. The forum for debate, shall be: is it a pool thing to come to the funds and go? Let's take one target for example. We all want to be net zero by, and that's a way more complicated question than that question because of lots of other things. We all want to be net zero by a date. Can we all agree a date? Is it 2030? Is it 2050? Is it 2025? Is it 2075? Because it's very difficult for a pool to build a fund to target multiple dates to be net zero by. Yeah? And then within that, you've got the whole question of what is net zero. Net zero is made up of two things. It's made up of getting rid of your carbon and then crossing your fingers and hoping all this stuff that is going to go on the offset side and the brand new technology that hasn't even been created yet actually works. Yeah? So it's always a balance between those two things. You know elected members as much as I do. One, do they understand that? As in, do they understand the difference between net zero and carbon free? And will they know what they're voting for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you say,
even if they do understand, so let's put. They say there's 5 London boroughs that say sod net zero. I want to go carbon free.
yeah.
I just want to get carbon out of my portfolio. So London City's going right. So we need a carbon free fund. With the rest of them, they might all agree about they all want to be net zero by 2035, let's say. But have they all agreed on the balance between taking the carbon out and balancing that carbon with offsets, new technology, investment in green energy? Is it 50-50? Is it 70-30? Is it 90-10? And even beyond that, what are your milestones? So if I want to be net zero by 2035, what am I measuring in 2028? What am I measuring in 2030? What am I measuring in 2032? Where do I want to be by then? So all of those things. Now, if the pool and the funds can coalesce around a reasonably consistent set of targets and milestones and balances and everything else, then TCFD shouldn't be that much of a problem for the LGPS, because the pool will just go, okay, I'll create 3 funds, I've got the measures against all of them, there you go, there's all the information you need to do your TCFD reporting. If, however, they all go, no, we've got 15 different dates to go net zero by, we've got 20 different balances between carbon free and whatever, and then, and I've got a conference this afternoon on this very subject, which I'm going to talk about, what about nuclear? Does that count in your carbon free? Because we know there's some elected members out there who go, sod that doesn't count.
Yeah.
So this is potentially a massive opportunity for pools. It's almost, if you like, the question that they were created to answer, even though nobody knew what the question was at the time.
Yeah. But good luck in trying to get 32 London boroughs to agree to aligning their targets. I mean, as you say, it does vary between 2030, 2040, 2050, and then an extraordinary array of net free, completely free,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody has that
That's
understanding.
completely free, including nuclear, completely free, not
Yeah.
including nuclear.
Yeah, you're never going to get agreement on because they'll all have their own views as to what the ambitions will be.
I mean, I was having a chat with Steve Lee the other day about this because he was saying, so how do we as asset managers, I mean, it's the same question for the pool, how do we as asset managers respond to this? And I said to him, if you got 30 clients came to you and I went, we all want the same fund, but we all want the fund that enables us to hit net zero at different times with different balances between carbon free and not carbon free. Oh, and those three want to make sure that there's no nuclear in there. He just went, I can't. I just can't do that.
So without that alignment, is presumably it's almost impossible for the pool to get everything together and to
Well, again, it depends. It goes back to depends on those decisions I've just talked about. Are they strategic decisions or are they implementation decisions? Because I've been on conferences fairly recently where I talked about climate change and your strategy for climate change, and was shot down by somebody who said climate change is an implementation issue, not a strategy issue. But you and I both know that our elected members won't say it like that. They will want to go, no nuclear, I want wind power in there, not too sure about wave power because of the ducts or whatever, or the impact on local economy. Yeah. They will have lots of other things that they will want to get into that in terms of, it's not just a question of saying, can you all agree on a date by which you want to be net zero? Because that's the only decision you can make. Some of them will go, yeah, okay, that's fine, because I just want to do my fiduciary duty and be able to tick this box. But there are going to be extremes at both ends. I don't know if you were on the Responsible Investment Conference we did a few weeks ago with DG Publishing, but in one of them, it ended up with a bit of a slanging match between Councillor Onslow, who was on panel, and another councillor, who's a Green councillor from Camden, I think it was, who were both making very valid things, but it got a bit heated.
Yeah.
With the councillor for Camden calling Councillor Onslow a climate denier.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
And that, for me, is something the government really, really needs to think about, because this, for me, is where it links back to the Good Governance Project. So, never forget pooling. Let's go back to who makes what decision and why. Now, up until this point, I've made this point about 3 times so far. In my very long career, I've probably only seen half a dozen instances where elected members are making decisions for the wrong reasons. They're making them because they want to. They're not good investment decisions. I will probably see at least another half a dozen in the next 18 months just on this subject, because we both know that there are people who want to be carbon free by next Tuesday, regardless of the impact that that's going to have on the portfolio.
And if there's a severe financial impact, it really doesn't bother them at all.
It doesn't bother them at all, because I'm here to save the world.
Yeah.
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 And at the other end of the scale, there will be the Councillor Onslow saying, and to a certain extent I agree with them, you're asking me to set targets, and at the same time you're telling me the measures are useless. So, aren't you asking me to take a risk by even setting a target? So you've got 2 very, very valid points of view. And the problem is that those points of view are more heart than head. And therefore, I can see some very tasty committees coming up over the next 18 months or so. And more than I've ever seen it before, probably dividing on party lines. So you've got, for example, Waltham Forest, who have said they are going to be fossil fuel free by this year.
Yep.
Made that commitment in 2016 for a 5-year program of getting rid of all of their fossil fuels. So I'm doing LGPS Live next Wednesday will be on what is net zero, and I've asked Debbie Drew from Waltham Forest to come along and talk about how they're getting on.
So that's not just the pension fund, is that the entire council in terms of...
I think they have got they've certainly got a climate emergency within the council, but the pension fund itself has made a commitment back in 2016 to be fossil fuel free within 5 years.
Wow. No wonder we don't see Debbie Drew. I mean, she's on the cross pool group, but we've not seen her for about the last 10 meetings. I think she really is under the cosh with...
Massively under the cosh.
Yeah.
And again, what you've got there is a... We've always known that in our careers, whether you're working for Newham or you're working for Westminster, and you know when you walk into a committee, 99% of the councillors are all one party. Regardless of that, everybody's sort of basically taking their rosette off when they walk into the committee.
Oh yes, yeah.
I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're going to get more instances of Labour or Green run or heavily influenced councils going down a disinvestment, decarbonise as quickly as possible route, and Tory councils going fiduciary duty.
Yeah.
Engagement. I think it's going to be a challenge. I think it's going to be a massive challenge for how we do governance and where decisions are made. And I think for governments just to sit to one side and go on then, get on with it, is not really recognising the issue. Now, I have massive sympathy with all of them. I mean, every time I hear somebody speak, I sort of essentially change my mind, because you've got the engagement lot who are saying it's only by engagement will we get, and we saw the thing with Shell this week, and all the engagement lot are going, this is brilliant, this is a massive win for engagement. We got the courts involved. Shell's now having to do things it didn't really want to do because we've engaged both as shareholders and through the courts. And then you've got the other side going, yeah, but it's still Shell. For heaven's sake. It might only be doing half as much damage as it was before, but it's still doing that damage.
Yeah, but I would say all of those people still get into their cars and they still get on their flights.
Yeah, and the other thing for me is, and I'm probably going to bring this up this afternoon as well, the engagement argument, which I do have lots of sympathy for, at the same time sort of feels like groupthink, and sort of feels like sitting on the fence, and sort of feels like I don't actually want to make a decision, which I totally understand in lots of ways. But at the same time, I think there is an assumption being made that is quite dangerous. And the assumption is that the transition to a low carbon economy will be a straight line. Right? And you engage with the BPs and the Shells in order to bring them along on that journey, and their share prices will modulate, but probably stay where they are, providing you engage them enough to keep them going in the right direction. Right? The problem with that is the regulation that is going to be required, and this is regulation in terms of how much carbon you can put out and all of that kind of stuff. The big regulation, like whether you can drive a petrol car or not, that is not going to be straight line stuff. That is what that is going to be, because we both know politicians. It's going to be politicians doing nothing, panic, massive regulation. So it's going to be in steps rather than in a straight line. And if you're happily going along and engaging with a company that, oh, sorry, it's just been regulated out of business because governments around the world have panicked and decided that's what they need to do to hit their targets, you're suddenly left holding the can there, and it doesn't matter how much you've engaged with it, it suddenly is in a situation where it doesn't have a business in 5 years' time, and therefore the share price goes through the floor today.
So you think that the government could take these seismic leaps at any one time and really?
Well, I mean, we saw it with. We've already seen it with cars. You know, so it was going to be you won't be able to buy a petrol car in 2040, and that's just kept coming forward and forward because they look at it and they go, "Oh shit, we're not going to hit our 2 degrees target. How are we going to hit it? Let's bring that forward." Yeah.
So these car manufacturers really have to be on the ball as to what these possibilities are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have done. I mean, if we'd have been another 10 years down the line, it may well have been. They could have said, "Oh, actually, no, it's going to be electric only by 2023."
Yeah.
In which case, you're probably talking about a number of car manufacturers around the world going out of business.
Yeah.
Because they just can't hit that target, and that won't be just there. It'll be transport. It'll be shipping. Shipping is going to be a massive one. At some point, there's going to be some significant regulation on the kind of fuel that could be used by ships to the point where half the fleet in the entire world won't be usable. So those kind of massive regulatory shifts, I think, are going to happen more and more unless governments can actually agree to targets over a long time scale and then stick to them. And up to now, the UK has been spectacularly bad at actually hitting any of its targets.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not the only one.
So with this entire scenario then, which obviously started with where we were with pooling and guidance and regulation, we've moved on to the issue with climate change and
yeah, just going to, I think the thing about climate change was, so it wasn't anticipated when pooling first started, so it wasn't part of the debate of what pool's for.
But it very much is now.
It very much is now, and I would see it as, depending on your view of pooling, it's either a massive opportunity for pools to prove that here's something else they could do really well, and or it's a massive challenge to the pools about how they're going to do this. But it's more, for me, a challenge to the LGPS in us all making our own decisions about stuff this important. Is that the right way of doing it? If the LGPS, which is £300 billion, is going to make a difference on climate change, can it do that in 87 different ways? Or does it really have to come together and use that £300 billion in a single-minded way in order to actually make a change? Because if we do it in 87 different ways, there's far more chance that government is going to have to do the massive regulatory jump because we've not been able to actually affect what we thought we could.
Yeah. Okay. If you remember last year, I used the theme of red lines throughout, so crossing those red lines. Is there a similar theme that jumps out at you in this current scenario?
I would take, just entirely off the top of my head, but I would repeat it, but I would say green lines.
Right.
Pooling and climate change. Where are the green lines? Because as I said, the pooling debate and the climate change debate in terms of target setting, setting measures, setting scenarios and all that are exactly the same as we've had all the way through pooling. Where is the decision made and what effect does it have for it to be made there or there?
Yeah.
Now, whether that's I can get scale, therefore I can get cost, or I can influence what the temperature of the world is going to be in 50 years' time.
Right. Okay, that's great. That
Cool.
gives me a lot to think about there.
I mean, it's actually just interesting in terms of your committees. I mean, where are they on sort of thinking about TCFD, climate change? Are they in the wait and see? Are they in the fiduciary duty? Not our problem.
Yes, it travels the entire spectrum. So you've got RBKC; they're not interested, although they see now that they need to be seen to be doing something. So we've got a series. In fact, the chairman, I've never come across this in local government in my entire career. But the chairman at RBKC has said to me, stand down, I will write the report for the next committee. So he wants complete ownership of it.
That's how hands-on it's starting to get.
Yeah. So
it's not just a question of sitting there, letting officers bring in the report and go, I'll pick the middle one because that's what I always do.
Yeah. So he wants to be in total control of this agenda as far as the committees. I mean, he leads the committee with an iron fist anyway, but he wants total control over this to the extent he will write the report. So I'm not even sure if that's allowed. So I've brought it to the attention of the Section 151 and the chief exec, saying, well, I've been told this is what's happening. It's up to you really to combat it if you want to. And then the other end of the spectrum is Hammersmith and Fulham. They are entirely on board with the green agenda. They love anything that has a positive impact on improving the planet. So they lap any of this stuff up and really enjoy being in the centre of it all and making a real difference. So you've got the two ends of the spectrum there. Westminster's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So the fiduciary is very important, but then we've got Labour and Conservative members of the committee who very much into making a real difference on not just the climate but on society.
Yeah, because that's it. Forget that even on the climate side, you've then got the whole thing about just transition. So are we decarbonising? But if we decarbonise, is that going to mean people are going to lose their jobs? And how do I bring that into the equation? It's going to be. I don't think I will have ever seen pension committees being more political and more hands-on and more passionate about investment decisions than I've ever seen in my career.
Yeah. So the green lines, I do like that. That's a distinction on pooling.
So is pooling part of the solution on climate change for funds, or is it just part of the problem, like every other asset manager out there, that it's going to have to give us what we want, but if we all want different things, then how on earth are they going to cope? And as I said, that's the same question to 91 or BlackRock or Invest or L&G than it is to the London Civ or whoever. Where the pools have an advantage over a BlackRock or a 91 is that they are a collection of the investors, or they should be a collection of the investors, and that asset manager that is the pool should only be acting in the best interest of those investors. If you're investing with BlackRock or 91 or L&G, they've got thousands of other institutional investors they have to please. Pool doesn't have to. It only has to please 33.
Yeah.
And I know that's a big ask, but that's all it's got to do.
Yeah.
And it's all very well saying, I'm going to go outside the pool because this asset manager can give me what I want. Really? Is that asset manager really just giving you what you want and ignoring all of its other clients? Or are you getting a watered down version, an even more watered down version than the London Civ could actually give you?
Yeah. Jolly good. That's excellent, Jeff. Thank you.
Well,
Um,
right,
Can you do me a favour? On the Andrian very kindly sent me the single code response, which I've found very, because I got mine in yesterday, so I did manage to pick up some of the ideas that were in the response. Are you okay to add me to your mailing list for that type of?
certainly, will do, mate.
I'll be very grateful because it was very helpful. I did manage to get a response in. I don't know how many local authorities have bothered to respond.
I spoke to Nick Gannon on Monday. He said he'd already seen a few from local government. He's expecting quite a few from local government. He said, given the reaction that he's had so far.
Yeah.
I mean, he got an absolute pasting at the PLSA last week.
Oh, right.
He's just he must be some kind of masochist. He was on 3 different sessions at the PLSA and got crucified in every single one of them.
Yeah, I mean it's extraordinarily ambitious what they've tried to do, but I do admire them for at least having a go. And
I mean that's what I said to him. I said, look, I can understand why you'd want to do this because otherwise you write in 100 different codes.
Yeah.
But we do need some kind of translation because conversations I've had out there with 151 officers and heads of pensions is I've just got no idea which bit I'm supposed to read.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this bit talks about risk, but I've already got a risk register. So do I have to do this as well? It's that kind of question.
I honestly can't get my head around that own risk assessment section. It's a complete. And I mean, what would be really helpful if, as we've said in the response, we need some kind of example model that would point us in the right direction. But I doubt that they would ever come up with that. So it would be interesting.
All right, mate.
All right, thanks a lot, Jeff.
Cheers now.
See you later. Bye.